Hello, children, how are you? I hope that in this time of lockdown, you are safe at home, and that is needed for the time. For ourselves only, we should keep ourselves locked down at home. But children, we cannot stop. We have to move on with our studies. For that, today I am trying to explain the chapter A Triumph of Surgery from the book, this one. That is Footprints Without Feet. The first chapter is A Triumph of Surgery. I am trying to explain it in short as much as possible so that it will help you to understand that chapter in a better way. It is the story of a dog, Tricky, a small dog, that has been narrated by James Herriot, the author, who is actually a veterinary surgeon, a British veterinary surgeon, who has written his experiences about different animals and their owners as he has met in his life, and he has explained in small different stories. Here is also about Mrs. Humphrey, who was the owner of the dog Tricky, which was a very fat dog, and how she pampered the dog. And sometimes pampering is not the right way to take care of a dog, and how the dog got cured, that we will learn in this chapter. Now the first question is, what is a triumph? Triumph means victory, to win, of surgery. Surgery means we all know that with knives, scissors, needles, as doctors do operations for the patients. What for? For the benefit of the patient, so that though it is operation, but that is for the sake of the patient, so that the patients can get cured from the ailments that they are suffering. So here also there is a surgery was there done with Tricky and by James Herriot, the doctor, and how he was victorious, that we will know from this chapter. I'm not going through line by line, but I'm trying to explain it passage wise. There was a dog named Tricky, and he was very much loved by his mistress. He had become hugely fat, like a blotted sausage. Sausage, you know, like cylindrical meat, minced meat that are made into small cylinders, and if they get blotted, then it will become more swollen. So the animal was cylindrical but very fat, so it looked like a blotted sausage with a leg at each corner, as if in the blotted sausage at the four corners the legs were there. Tricky looked like that. His eyes bloodshot and rheumy, and stared straight ahead, and his tongue lolled from his jaw, which suggested that he was always tired and gasped, and he had to pant to breathe. Mrs. Humphrey complained to Mr. Herriot that he was listless, tired, and he seemed to have no energy. Where from the energy would be there? If the dog becomes so fat, how the energy it will get? It's not for the dog, it's for anyone. If someone is very fat, he would not get energy to walk, to move. And the same thing happened with Tricky also. And he was suffering from malnutrition. According to Mrs. Humphrey, that it was a malnutrition, that is less nutrition he was having, and that is why he was feeling tired, which is not at all true. We all know. So I have been giving him some little extras between meals to build him up, says Mrs. Humphrey, that he was having his meal already, and in between the meals she was giving Tricky some extra food. Why? Because she thought that he was having malnutrition, less nutrition, and so he needed more food to get the energy, which we all know how funny it is to say that he was having malnutrition. and different types of malt, cod liver oil, bowl of Horlicks at night, etc., etc. Mr. Harriet asked that, did you cut down on the sweet things as I told you? Oh, I did for a bit, but he seemed to be so weak I had to relent. She did not provide sweet to him, to Tricky, but she felt that he was feeling very weak day by day for that, and so she started giving sweets, like he loves ice creams, cakes, chocolates, etc., etc., etc. And in this regard, let me refer you that we all know that generally animals, especially dogs, they die out of diabetes. The first disease attack that attacks a dog is diabetes. So already we know that sweets are not suggested for the dogs. Mrs. Pumphrey, out of love, out of care, which you can understand how much wrong it was to provide to provide sweets to the dog, and she provided sweets to the dog, ice cream, chocolates, etc., etc. I looked down again at the little dog. That was the trouble. Tricky's only fault was greed. Tricky was so much greedy, so that whatever you give, whenever you give, he will have it. Are you giving him plenty of exercise? Okay, fine. Then the dog likes to eat food, and so Mrs. Pumphrey, out of love, given enough food. But for that, exercise is to be done. For that, enough exercise which will cut down the fat, that is needed. So the doctor asked that, are you giving that at all to the dog? No. Why? Well, he has his little walks. With me, as you can see, but Hoggin, the gardener, has been down with lumbago, so there has been no ring throwing lately. The exercises that Tricky used to get, that is, a gardener used to play with him by throwing the rings, and he will run and go and bring it, that has been stopped. Why? What is the excuse? Excuse is that gardener now is having a back pain, as he has to bow down throughout the day and has to walk, so he had a back pain. And for that, Tricky cannot get exercise. So it's not the fault of Tricky, rather it was because of the gardener is not available, so Tricky could not get the exercise. But for that, what happens? What problem? Problem is coming to Tricky only. I tried to sound severe. Now I really mean this. If you don't cut his food right down and give him some exercise, he is going to be really ill. Now the doctor became very strict and said that you have to become very strict now, because if you do not give him proper food and exercise, then one day it will be a trouble for him. And Mrs. Pumphrey wrung her hands. Oh, I will, Mr. Harriet. And she was now said that yes, it is needed, I can understand, and so she was now ready to give the proper food to Tricky. I watched their progress with growing concern. Tricky was tottering along in his little tweed coat. He was a whole wardrobe of these coats. Tricky had different types of coats. He has a full wardrobe of coats. Time to time, for different days, Mrs. Pumphrey changed the coats, and he had different types of tweed coats, that is woolen coats that Tricky could wear. And I thought it wouldn't be long before I heard from Mrs. Pumphrey. Mr. Harriet says that I was sure that within very soon a call will come from Mrs. Pumphrey to take care of Tricky, because Tricky problem will become severe. Now the expected call came, and Mrs. Pumphrey was distraught. Tricky would eat nothing. Tricky is now started refusing to eat, spent all his time lying on a rug and panting, didn't want to go for walks, didn't want to do anything. It has become very weak according to Mrs. Pumphrey, and so she gave a call to Mr. Harriet to take care of him. Now, I had made plans in advance. Mr. Harriet says that he had a plan already about what to do with Tricky, how to treat him. He had the plan. And so he suggested that Tricky would have to be kept in observation in the hospital, that is in his home. He has to be kept in hospital. It cannot be cured at home. He is to be hospitalized, that is he is to be separated from Mrs. Pumphrey, and he is to be taken to his home, Mr. Harriet's home. Under his care, he is to be kept for 15 days. The poor lady almost cried, and she was sure he would pine and die if he did not see her every day. She said that it is difficult for Tricky even because Tricky cannot live without seeing her. So Tricky would miss, and Tricky might die also without seeing Mrs. Pumphrey. But Mr. Harriet said that he had to become very firm and strict and took him away. The entire staff was roused, and maids rushed in and out, bringing his day bed, night bed, favorite cushions, toys, rubber rings, breakfast bowl, lunch bowl, supper bowl, etc., etc., etc. All sorts of accessories that were there for Tricky. His own dresses, his own bed, different beds, different bowls, some supper bowl, night breakfast bowl, dinner bowl, etc., etc., and all sorts of accessories. Mrs. Pumphrey thought that had to be given for 14 days when Tricky would be with Mr. Harriet. As I moved off, Mrs. Pumphrey, with a despairing cry, threw an armful of the little coats through the window. But Mr. Harriet knew that those were not at all needed, and he did not have enough space also in his cart to carry so many things. So he started his cart. And when he started, Mrs. Pumphrey desperately threw some of the things which she could pick up and threw through the window of the car, and is for her own satisfaction that she had given it to for Tricky. Now, out of the road, I glanced at the pathetic little animal gasping on the seat by my side. As I left the house, I saw that how much the animal was gasping because it has become so fat that it cannot move now. Poor old lad, I said, you haven't a kick in you, but I think I know a cure for you. I know how to treat you and how to manage you and how to cure you from this ailment. At the surgery, the household dog searched round me. Tricky looked down at the noisy pack with dull eyes, and when put down, lay motionless on the carpet. When he was brought at home, he was lying motionless on the carpet, could not match up with the other dogs also. The other dogs, after sniffing round him for a few seconds, decided he was an uninteresting object and ignored him. They thought that Tricky will also respond to them, but the Tricky did not have such energy or strength to respond to them. So he was lying, and the other dogs found him to be very uninteresting, and they left him and ignored him. I made up a bed for him in a warm, loose box next to one where the other dogs slept with other dogs. Simple box was kept and a bed was arranged. Where at his bed, where he used to sleep, nothing was there. Only simple a box. As it is done for other dogs, the same thing was done for Tricky also. And at the end of the second day, he started to show some interest in his surroundings, and on the third he began to whimper when he heard the dogs in the yard. First day went like that, he could not move. Second day he started showing interest, and the third day he started to come out and to move along with the other dogs. When I opened the door, Tricky trotted out and was immediately engulfed by Joe, the greyhound. Different dogs were there, and they engulfed him, and he started playing with them. Like Joe was there, then he also started with the playing. After rolling him over and thoroughly inspecting, the dogs moved off down the garden. Tricky followed them, rolling slightly with his surplus fat. Somehow walking, rolling, somehow he wanted to move with his surplus fat. Later that day, I was present at feeding time. I watched while Tristan sloped the food into the bowls, there was a usual headlong rush, and as you know, the food was given in the middle, and all the dogs rushed to grab their own food. Tricky has not learned. Always Tricky was provided with the food in front of him. He doesn't know how to fight and grab his own food. They grabbed and he did not get anything. There was usual headlong rush followed by the sounds of high-speed eating. Every dog knew that if he fell behind the others, he was liable to have some competition for the last part of his meal. Every dog knew that if he becomes slow, he will not get the food. Tricky did not know that. One thing I missed, that he was not given any food till death. 2-3 days have passed, he was not given any food. I have missed the line. For 2 days I kept an eye on him, giving him no food, but plenty of water. Water should be given because dehydration might happen. So water was enough given, but food was not required at all. So no food was given for 2 days to this dog. Third day he was given the food along with other dogs to fight and to grab, but he could not manage. Then when they had finished, Tricky took a walk around the shining bowls, licking casually. When they finished it and have left the place, then Tricky reached there and he started eating food from, trying to lick whatever was the leftover food from there. I was pleased to see him jostling his way towards it. From then on, his progress was rapid, and after that, the progress became very rapid, very fast. He started. He had no medical treatment, nothing, no medicinal treatment was given, no medicine, nothing was given. Only no food through 2-3 days, enough water, and after that, he was taught to fight and to eat food, grab food, and to run, to fight with others, and to do. Everything was not supplied to him. He discovered his joys of being bowled over, tramped on, and squashed every 5 minutes. He became an accepted member of the gang. Now, slowly, he also started playing with them, fighting with them, running with them. So, he became one of the part of the gang of the other dogs. Fighting like a tiger for his share at mealtimes and hunting rats in the old hen house at night. As the other dogs do, now he also has started doing all the works like that and started showing the activities that are expected from the dogs to do. All the while, Mrs. Humphrey Howard anxiously in the background, ringing a dozen times a day for the latest bulletins. Now, what about Mrs. Humphrey? Tricky is doing good. Now, Mrs. Humphrey, do you think that she would be sitting back at home and waiting for 14 days to come? Constantly, she went on calling Mr. Harriet. How is he? What is he doing? What type of food is he taking? All the bulletins, all the news information were to be given to her. And whether he was wearing the correct coat, etc., etc. But I was able to tell her that the little fellow was out of danger and convalescing rapidly. Now, I just informed her, nothing more, no specific information, only the most important thing is that he mentioned that he was doing good. He was improving, he was doing good, and he's showing good signs of his improvement. Now, what Mrs. Humphrey then do, she started to bring round fresh eggs, 2 dozen at a time, to build up Tricky's strength. Now, 2 dozen eggs she used to bring to build up Tricky's strength, whatever Mr. Harriet is giving, but she, out of care, out of concern, started giving 2 dozens of eggs to him so that Mr. Harriet can provide it to Tricky. And for a happy period, my partners and I had 2 eggs for each for breakfast. What the eggs were done? The eggs were, do you think, were given to Tricky? Not at all. Mr. Harriet started taking 2 eggs himself and 2 eggs to his servant he used to give. Nothing disclosed to Mrs. Pumphrey. If he says Mrs. Pumphrey that Tricky doesn't need it, etc., etc., she would not listen. She would cry. She would start making a panic. So simply he accepted the eggs. Now what to do with the eggs? He started eating the eggs along with his servant. But when the bottles of wine began to arrive, the real possibilities of the situation began to dawn on the household. Now started coming up bottles of wine started arriving in the name of Tricky. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch became a ceremonial occasion. Now we are enjoying the lunch. Mr. Harriet says he and his servant now started enjoying the lunch. Earlier the breakfast was enjoyable with 2 extra eggs. Now the lunch has become very enjoyable with the wine also. It was to enrich Tricky's blood. Lunch now became a ceremonial occasion. So now they have started enjoying the lunch also. We could hardly believe it when the brandy came to put a final age on Tricky's constitution. Finally, Mrs. Pumphrey started bringing brandy also for the dog. So now, for a few nights, the fine spirit was rolled around, inhaled and reverently drunk. Now, breakfast 2 eggs, lunch with wine and dinner with, finally the dinner was with brandy. So the whole day used to pass very nicely for Mr. Harriet and his servant. With the food that was sent by Mrs. Pumphrey for Tricky, no need for Tricky, so they started eating and they were enjoying the delicacies. Now they were days of deep content, starting well with the extra egg, etc., etc. Now it was a temptation to keep Tricky on as a permanent guest, but I knew Mrs. Pumphrey was suffering, and after a fortnight felt compelled to phone and tell her that the little dog had recovered and was awaiting collection. I thought, Mr. Harriet thought that it will be a very delightful thing to have Tricky as a guest, because the food will come and enough they will enjoy, but that cannot be possible. So after 14 days, he called Mrs. Pumphrey that you come and take your dog, because now the dog is absolutely okay. Within minutes, after 30 feet of gleaming, about 30 feet of gleaming black metal drew up. Gleaming black metal means the big black car drew up outside the surgery, outside the hospital. That is his house. The chauffeur opened the door and I could just make out the figure of Mrs. Pumphrey almost lost in the interior. Her hands were tightly clasped in front of her. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet, do tell me the truth. Is he really better?" "Yes, he is fine. There's no need for you to get out of the car. I will go and fetch him." I walked through the house into the garden. A mass of dogs was hurtling round and the lawn, and in their midst, ears flapping, tail waving, which the waving of tail was not there 14 days back. Now the tail has started waving, and the little golden figure of Tricky. In 2 weeks, he had been transformed into a lithe, hard-muscled animal which is needed. He was keeping up well with the pack, stretching out in the great bounds, his chest almost brushing the ground. I carried him back along the passage to the front of the house. The chauffeur was still holding the car door open, and when Tricky saw his mistress, he took off from my arms in a tremendous leap and sailed into Mrs. Pumphrey's lap. Naturally, Tricky jumped from his lap and rushed to Mrs. Pumphrey. She gave a startled "ooh" and then had to defend herself as he swarmed over her, licking her face and barking. Now Mrs. Pumphrey had to tackle herself, because now Tricky has become such a bold dog with full strength and energy that Mrs. Pumphrey could not manage the jerk that she got when Tricky jumped on her lap. During the excitement, I helped the chauffeur to bring out the beds, toys, cushions, coats and bowls, none of which had been used at all. As the car moved away, Mrs. Pumphrey leaned out of the window. Tears shone in her eyes. Her lips trembled. "Oh, Mr. Harriet," she cried, "how can I ever thank you? This is a triumph of surgery. This is really a good triumph of surgery that you have done. You have done such a wonderful surgery that my dog has become cured. So definitely it's a triumph of surgery. Now children, you think how it was a surgery, why it was a surgery called, and how it was the triumph of surgery was there. What type of triumph of surgery was there? These are the questions that you should think and try to find out. Thank you, children.